Hi, my name is Jenny Hardesty. I'm a student in the Transitional Doctorate Program at the University of Michigan, Flint. The title of my project is Evaluating Children for School-Based Physical Therapy, a Different Approach to Assessment. The reasons for choosing this project. School-based physical therapists are required to evaluate children in the school setting and to make a convincing recommendation to the IEP team on if therapy services are needed or not. And there are currently many tests that are used that can be difficult to administer, and they are not necessarily always related to functioning in the school, and that physical therapists need to be educated on other tests that could be used to assess children for therapy in the schools that are more educationally relevant. Project objectives. Number one is to analyze what standardized tests that school-based physical therapists are currently using to evaluate students for physical therapy in the school. Number two, to discuss what tests are useful to evaluate kids without a particular diagnosis. Number three, to discuss what tests are useful to evaluate kids with a diagnosis of cerebral palsy, developmental coordination disorder, and Down syndrome. Number four, to make a 1 to 2 page handout to distribute to therapists on what tests to use. And number five, to discuss and educate school-based physical therapists through a PowerPoint presentation on the various tests that can be used. Project methods. A survey was made and distributed among school-based physical therapists. The survey was made and distributed on SurveyMonkey on January 15, 2019. The results of the survey were analyzed and put in a table format that was easy to read and interpret. That was completed on January 25th. And the review of literature was completed to discover more information on the tests currently being used and to discover other standardized tests that can be used that are more applicable to the school setting. This was completed on January 27th. A PowerPoint presentation was put together to educate school-based therapists on other testing that can be used. This was completed on the 16th of March. And an educational brochure was made that can be distributed among physical therapists that was completed on the 9th of March. Project outcome, survey results. As you can see here, 50% of the therapists are only using one test for assessing kids in the schools, and 40% are using 2 to 3 tests. For tests used for preschool-age children, a majority of the respondents are using the Peabody test. For tests for 5 to 9 years old, the majority of therapists are using the Brunick-Swastry test of motor proficiency, the school function assessment, the test of gross motor development, or the Peabody. And tests for those kids older than 9 years old, the school function assessment, and the BOT2 are used most often. Next question asked was, how do you feel the BOT is in evaluating kids, since this seems to be a test that's used most, it seems to be used very frequently. 61% of the therapists feel that the BOT2 is not useful or not so useful at all. The last question asked was an open-ended question. Based on your experience, what do you feel is the best test for evaluating children for physical therapy in the schools? Several of the respondents replied that the various standardized tests currently being used, such as the Peabody, the BOT, the school function assessment, and the TGMD2. But some of the other respondents said there's not any great test related to school-based physical therapy. Up to age 6, the Peabody, but older kids, question mark. Another one, clinical observation provides the most functional information. I've yet to find a standardized test that is truly applicable for the school setting. Another respondent, I like the school function assessment. Some tests such as the Peabody and the BOT2 prove to be difficult because often significant cognitive difficulties prevent the child from understanding what is being asked of them. And then I do not think either of the tests I use is great. I think I need to find a new one. An educational PowerPoint presentation was created and it was completed on the 16th of March. This presentation discusses a few of the tests currently being used and the difficulties with these tests. The difficulties are that there's a lot of time involved in the test costs money, and the relevance of the test is not necessarily related to the school setting. The presentation also discussed the International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health Model and how it is used when assessing children in the school setting. The ICF model has a personal factor domain, the participation domain, the activity domain, and body structure and function domain, and environmental factors. Tests used to assess children without specific diagnoses. In the personal factors domain, we have the Child and Adolescent Factors Inventory, the CAFI. This test takes under 5 minutes to complete. It can be found online. For the participation domain, we've got the School Function Assessment. This test takes time to complete. And we also have the Child and Adolescent Scale of Participation, which is a test that can be found online that's free. It has 10 questions and it has good retest reliability. In the activity and body and structure and function domain, you have the BOT2, the P-body, and the TGMD. But there's a lot of time involved in these testings, and these tests cost money. And once again, these tests aren't necessarily relevant to the school setting. Other tests that can be used instead are the timed floor to stand test, the timed up and down stair test, the pediatric reach test, and the 30-second walk test. These tests are all free, and they don't take much time to administer. They have normative data, and they're more applicable to the school. Tests used to assess children with the following diagnoses: cerebral palsy and the personal factors. You've got the CP Child, which is a longer test, but it can be very beneficial. In the participation and environmental factors domain, the recommendation is just to observe the child in his or her environment. There are tests available, but all these cost money and are not in the realm of having a PT administered in the school. In the activity domain, you got the Abilico Kids. In the body and structure and function, you have the 5 repetition sit to stand, the modified timed up and go test, and the timed up and down stairs test. Down syndrome. There's only a few tests that I found that were specific to Downs. In the activity and body structure function, there was the four square step test. In the developmental coordination disorder, you have the activity and participation, the DCD daily Q, the Abilico Kids, and the body structure and function test, body structure and function domain, where the 30-second walk test, the pediatric reach test, and there's many of the other tests that can also be used that were mentioned earlier. Project outcomes continued. A 2-page handout was made to distribute to school-based physical therapists. That was completed on the 9th of March. Discussion. The surveys showed that most school-based physical therapists are using standardized testing to evaluate kids, but the majority of them are only using 1 or maybe 2 to 3. Most therapists are using the BOT2, the P-body, the gross motor function measure, the TGMD2, and the school function assessment, but many are not happy with these current tests being used. An extensive review of literature showed that there are many other tests that can be used that are more appropriate for the school setting, that take less time, are free, and have normative measures. Using the ICF model allows us to make convincing recommendations to the team on if school-based therapy is necessary or not. And the different diagnoses that were picked were due to the prevalence of the kids that we see in the school setting with those diagnoses. For example, cerebral palsy. Limitations of this project were the small number of respondents to the survey. There are only a few tests that were listed that could be used for preschool age children. Autism was not mentioned, yet most therapists see kids with this diagnosis. And then the discussion of the ICF and putting the various tests in different domains was difficult to do and not completely thorough. Clinical relevance. There's many children that are being seen for school-based physical therapy, and there's a distinct difference between medical-based therapy and school-based physical therapy. Therefore, the tests we use need to be appropriate in the school setting. And that the school-based physical therapist needs to use more than one test when evaluating kids for therapy, and they need to know that there are other tests that are available. Here are some references. Thank you for listening to my presentation. Reference: